Letter from Jane Austen to her sister Cassandra, May 31st, 1811.
I will not say your mulberry trees are dead, but I am afraid they are not alive. Aloha and welcome back to my channel. Marilyn, sometimes called Maya, the baby boomer booktuber, and I'm here today with the two loves of my life beside the one behind the camera. And this is Princessa Jasmine. She'll be 14 years old on my birthday, actually, in August. And this is my oldest female chick, and she'll be 15. And they both got groomed, so they wanted to say hello. Well, Jasmine wanted to say hello. Chick she's grouchy. She's a grouchy old lady. So I'll put them down because they don't like to be held like this. This is the Jane Austen edition of my Friday Reads and Razzmatazz. Well, there's not going to be too much razzmatazz because I'm in a Jane Austen state of mind. Okay, what does that mean? That means that I finished 2 Jane Austen books. The first one will be right here, called Mansfield Park. And that's one of the books that is group read this month for Jane Austen July. And I had the most wonderful time reading that book. I won't go into a wrap-up right now, but I have to say that it's different from the other Jane Austen books that I've read. And I heard that Fanny Price is not a typical Austen heroine, but I beg to differ with that because Jane Austen herself believed in her and said that that was her favorite heroine. So I'll just say that I read it very closely, and it was a pretty big book. I think it was over 400 pages, and I enjoyed it. I read a few chapters every night until it was done, and I couldn't wait to get back to it. I was glad that it had some notes because I'm unfamiliar with the Regency period, Regency and Georgian period plays, the play that they put on, and what was going on during that time with Napoleon, because this was right during that era, and it had a lot to do with it. But I enjoyed it thoroughly, and then I went right into reading Persuasion. Persuasion has to be my favorite book so far. Of course, I haven't read Pride and Prejudice for a very long time, and but I really liked the sadness of the book, of lost love, found love, being not in the bloom of life, and I really enjoyed it. And I will give a thorough wrap-up later on at the end of Jane Austen July. I will say that both books disappointed me at the end because after all of the build-up, Jane Austen, instead of having a touching scene at the end, she prefers to tell us what happened. And that was a little disappointing in both books, Persuasion and Mansfield Park. But please let me know if that disappointed you, or is that, did I just want the press of a hand or something? But all in all, I love this book. All right. So I said that this was a Jane Austen July for me, in that I wasn't able to really concentrate on anything else except one book, which I will get into in a minute, and I'll tell you why. I started Death Comes to Pemberley by P.D. James, And this had a wonderful review. And when I started reading it, I realized that the first chapters had to deal specifically with Pride and Prejudice. And I haven't read Pride and Prejudice for a very long time. And I felt that it was ruining it for me. So I have to put this down until I reread Pride and Prejudice. So that was one book that I couldn't get into. Then I started Lady Susan by Jane Austen. Look at this beautiful cover. I mean, this is just beautiful. And it includes Sandition, the Watson Sandition, and the complete juvenile. And which I wasn't aware of any of these. But when I started reading Lady Susan, now I don't know if you ever had the experience of when you're reading something really, really good, instead of going forward, you start going backwards because you don't want it to end. And I've had this experience a lot this month, that I didn't want my Jane Austen experience to end. So Sandition was the non-completed novel of before she, passed away, before Jane Austen passed away at the age of 41. So I'm not sure when I'm going to finish that. But Lady Susan was really interesting, and I didn't want it to end. So I'm still on like the second letter. It's a book in letters. All right. And the same thing happened to me, but in a different way, when I watched or attempted to watch the Jane Austen book club. I had a few very good laughs, and I know it's a good movie, a good retelling of Jane Austen, and the actors in this were fantastic, but they were going through all of the novels, and I was going to get spoiled, so I said, I really don't want to watch this right now or read the book, but I will get back to this, probably by next Jane Austen July, if I'm still here, which I hope I am. Then another book that I couldn't finish, but not because I didn't want to, and this is Quartet in Autumn by Barbara Pym. And this won a lot of prizes, I found out, but my good friend Lil told me it wasn't her favorite Barbara Pym. But because I'm older and maybe have a different experience than her, I decided that I want to buy a new edition of this for my own, along with other Barbara Pym novels, because I think I'm going to be collecting these. And I'm not so much of a book collector, but that will be in another video where I talk about that in a tag next week. But so this is Quartet in Autumn, and I read Excellent Women, and I really enjoyed it, and I think I'll enjoy this one. It's also about older women, and I'm very excited, but I didn't want to start this until I got my new copy, so I can't tell you much about it. Okay, now for a controversial, I think, opinion of a book I haven't read yet, and it's Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day. And this was suggested to me by BookTube. If it wasn't for BookTube, I never would have picked it up. I really didn't know anything about it, except that it's a favorite of many BookTubers. And it's by Winifred Watson, and look at this gorgeous picture. It's just lovely. When I started it, I realized it's a retelling of Cinderella. And it reminded me, and it said that it reminded one of Fred Astaire movies. I really, really was into Fred Astaire movies. But I just wasn't ready to read this at this moment. So I'm putting this away for a different time when I'm more in the mood for it. Jane Austen July has really affected me in that I can't seem to read my favorite types of books, which are mysteries and other cozy things. Well, I shouldn't say other cozy things, but my normal type of reading. I'm just so in that state of mind that I just want to read Jane Austen stuff. Okay, so that brings me to a book that I am reading, called Mrs. Tim Carries On by D.E. Stevenson. And it's in large print, which I really appreciate. But it's a diary, and it's set in the 1940s in Britain during the time when, during the war, World War II. And Mrs. Tim, well, she basically carries on with her British spirit of, just carry on no matter what. And she's a very interesting character. But I wasn't interested in reading realism at the moment. I know I'm going to pick this up. Mrs. Tim is a very interesting character. The author says that this is basically exactly what happened to her. So it's very realist. And I'm not interested in realism at the moment, but I will pick this up. Maybe, it's a library book, so I have to return it, but I will pick it up again. And there's 4 books. And one is Mrs. Tim Christie. One is Mrs. Tim Carries On, which is this one. One is Mrs. Tim Gets a Job. And Mrs. Tim Flies Home. And they're all about the wife of a military, and I think he's Air Force. I'm not even sure. I'll read you a little bit of it. With her husband Tim off fighting in the Low Countries, Hester Christie returns to the diary she began in Mrs. Tim Christie. Once again, Mrs. Tim records her woman's round as housekeeper, mother, and hostess with gentle amusement. But in reality, her simple life is complicated by the evidence of a country at war, and throughout her record is the resolution to carry on sanely in an insane world. Hester's diary, written for Tim, is alive with courage, honesty, and resolve. And I see that it's a very realist kind of book. So I haven't finished this, but I did read a few chapters. Then, it's a book I read and gave 5 stars to. Our Spoons Came from Woolworths by Barbara Comyns. Now, this book had quite the controversial review on booktube and even on Goodreads, maybe less so on Goodreads than on people that I like to watch. So I love this book, and I'll tell you why. I loved it because it made me laugh so much. And I haven't laughed this much reading a book that is not a comedy in so long. I appreciate a book that gives me a belly laugh. And so I wrote a review on it. And I'm going to, I think I'm a better writer than a extemporaneous speaker. So I'm going to read you a little of my review that I kind of know what it says already. Okay, so Barbara Comyns' book, Our Spoons Came from Woolworths, is one of the 5 best books I've read in 2021. And I really mean this. The author, Maggie O'Farrell, and in case you don't know who Maggie O'Farrell is, she wrote Hamnet, and she's a wonderful writer. She wrote the foreword to this book, of this edition that I've read. She found it in a used bookshop and was hooked in the first few pages. She challenges the reader to read the first chapter and be unimpressed by the writing. I gave this book 5 stars because it was hilarious, tragic, and authentic. So it's autofiction at its best. And I'm always want to say that I don't like autofiction. But if it's autofiction that's really autobiography, I'll give it a pass. So Barbara Comyns, who's the author, she married young and to an artist, as did the main character. They both were artists and artists' models in the 1930s. They both suffered from poverty and lived chaotic lives. Animals, dogs, cats, and pet newts feature in both life stories. What I loved was how the author captured the foibles of youth, Sophia marries for love, but not wisely. Her husband, a fellow artist, is not interested in anything other than painting, which painters, again, are wont to do. Unfortunately, his dereliction of his wife and children brings about disaster. Sophia, who has been living in a bedsit since she was 17, is the only one earning money. When the depression hits, they practically starve. He still won't look for a job. And the author also lived in a bedsit at a very young age. Sophia is ignorant of the facts of life and becomes pregnant, and this is where both hilarity and catastrophe ensue. She gives birth in a charity hospital, and here's where I lost it. Hysterically laughing. They moved her from terrible room to terrible room, making her carry her luggage until the end. So, I gave birth in the 60s, and such indignities were forced upon her was similar to me, so I know she told the truth. In fact, there was a note at the beginning which she says that 3 parts were totally true: her wedding, the birth, and the poverty. I did some research and found Comyn also lived alone, like I said, in a bedsit. I love the freshness of this book, the depiction of bohemian London in the 20s and 30s, and how the Great Depression affected those unprepared for life's tragedies. This book is timeless. I remembered how I also bought my spoons at Woolworth's when I married at 16. And that's how I ended my review on Goodreads. But I also wanted to say that a lot of booktubers that I really admire on BookTube said that she was incredibly stupid, and she did one incredibly stupid thing after another. And maybe that's so. But you have to understand that she was so innocent when she got married. And we all make mistakes. And believe me, I made a lot of mistakes in my life. 100 times more stupid than she did. And I didn't have to starve. So I still agree with Maggie Farrell and all the 5-star reads that this book is hilarious, as my partner likes to say. Hilarious. As well as very sad. So, that's my 5-star review of Our Spoons Came from Woolworth's by Barbara Comyns. And I hope I'm saying it right. Comyns. Okay, so I'm going to end with another book that I'm reading very slowly called Tea with Jane Austen. It's such a beautiful book. I'm finding out so much about how people drank tea, made tea, served tea during Jane Austen's time. And it's complete with just beautiful photographs it's by Kim Wilson, by the way, because there's other books named Tea with Jane Austen. And I will end with a quotation, and it's not about Jane Austen, but it's during Jane Austen's time. Miss Fanny Brooke and myself made tea and coffee, her ladyship presiding at the chocolate tray. A more elegant private breakfast was never given to any company. The urns, trays, waiters, and canisters were all of silver, engraved with Sir Charles' arms. The china was beautiful. In short, the whole equipage was handsome beyond anyone I ever saw. So, that shows you how important tea was. And there's a lot of recipes that I want to try also in this book. So I hope you enjoyed the Jane Austen edition of my weekend. It's Friday now, but I don't know when this is going up. My Friday reads and Razzmatazz. So please subscribe to my channel if you're so inclined, and hit the notification bell. And I will be back with more Razzmatazz next week. Aloha oi.